You move overseas where they speak a different language, it's really different. Acculturation is a process by which people migrate to and learn a culture that is different from their original or their heritage culture, and that's known as acculturation. So some people from the reservation acculturated. Everybody acculturated because they had to change their culture. Obviously you did because, well, look, you've got different clothes on than you would have if you still lived a traditional Navajo life. You don't even wear the moccasins. I'm trying to think of what else you could wear. Breechcloths, I guess.
Jewelry?
Oh, maybe you do have a breechcloth on.
No.
Just
I like jewelry.
Oh, jewelry. Okay, I've got on a ring. That's something. There is nudity in today's lecture, so that's a warning. I know. Don't get excited. Moving to a new culture involves psychological adjustment. This adjustment occurs over a wide variety of domains. Acquiring a new language, of course, if you want to integrate yourself into the culture. Learning new interpersonal and social behaviors, becoming accustomed to new values, becoming a member of a minority group, adjusting one's self-concept. And sometimes the hardest part is thinking of yourself as a minority. A lot of people stay on the reservation. One of the reasons may be that they feel like they're in the majority. If they move to Phoenix, they feel like they will be a minority. And that may be one of the reasons why they stay here instead of moving. They did this fascinating study in 1955. Lysgaard, who's actually Norwegian, he tracked a number of Norwegian Fulbright students to the United States. And what he discovered was that the first few months that they were there, they had these wonderful experiences. They were especially having a very positive time in their visit. Everything was new in the United States. They'd read about the United States. They were real excited about being in the United States. So for the first few months, they were in kind of a honeymoon period. They were enjoying the experiences. They were meeting new people. They were trying new foods. They were communicating with people in a foreign language and feeling the excitement of participating in a novel and exotic environment. If you know anything about Norway, the Norwegians eat a lot of fish. They eat fish for breakfast. They don't eat bread, they eat toast. They eat crackers. What else do they eat? Practically everything's got fish in it. Oberg in 1960 offered the first few months as the honeymoon stage, as I was just saying. It's the existence of the honeymoon stage that keeps the tourism trade in business, of course, because you're rarely there more than a couple weeks. If you go visit France, you're there for a couple of weeks. You eat the food. You stay in a French motel or hotel, and for the first couple months, everything is rosy. Most travelers do not stay in a culture long enough to move past this stage, and they thus tend to view their experiences in new cultures to be, for the most part, pleasant and exciting. And that's one of the reasons why people travel a lot. I have a niece that goes to Europe. Every time she has a break, she goes to Europe. She's visited Poland. She visited Switzerland. She's been to northern Italy. You know, all of the places, and she's there for a couple of weeks, and she has just a fantastic time. No complaints whatsoever, except she went to Dachau, which was a bit of a shock to her, because, of course, it was one of the Nazi death camps. Following the honeymoon stage, most visitors turn a corner and begin to have increasingly negative views about their host culture. And this is what happened to me when I was in Germany. This is what happened to me when I was in Japan. I wasn't in Vietnam long enough to have this problem. Of course, we were in a different situation. Between 6 and 18 months, visitors experience the most negative feelings of their sojourn in a stage that has been labeled the crisis or the culture shock stage, where all of a sudden things aren't nearly as much fun as they were before. And this lasts for between 6 and 18 months. It can last for 2 years. People complain that in Japan it lasts for as long as 5 years. The Japanese culture is very, very different from just about any place that you can possibly imagine. In the culture shock stage, the thrill of having novel and exotic experiences wears off, and these experiences become tiring and difficult. At this stage, recent migrants often realize their language skills are not yet good enough for them to fully function in the new environment. What you realize is that you have a lot of information. You know the nouns, you know the verbs, but you're not really conversational at that point. And so you can't really have a conversation with somebody. You sit down and people start talking, and before it was really kind of exciting that you had an inkling of what was being said in the conversation, but now of course it's almost like you become paranoid, thinking that they're making fun of you. It gets really old really fast. During the culture shock stage, the migrant realizes that they do not have a rich enough understanding of how the system works to thrive. The people they initially met who were interested in them because they were exotic and different are no longer so interested in those differences. They become a fifth wheel, they become an extra person, they become somebody that somebody has to translate everything to, and they just become a burden to the people that were their friends before. Recent migrants may also be discovering that the television programs just aren't as interesting as the ones that they used to see in their home country, and they start to miss their favorite foods. One of the things we noticed in Japan and in Germany, you'd watch a program. So you'd watch 25 minutes of a program, and then they'd have 5 minutes of commercials. Then another program would come on. So they didn't interrupt the program, not like in the United States. They'll have 3 advertisement periods in between, so you really can't leave and do something else. You have to watch the television show. But in Japan and Germany, they don't do that. They show the whole show, and then they'll have 5 or 10 minutes of advertisements, as weird as that is. Now, one of the things that they do in both Germany and Japan is there's nudity in their advertisements. So it gets kind of interesting. I guess if you're interested in naked people, then you're more likely to try to watch their advertisements. Doesn't happen in the United States, of course, not really. We put humor in our advertisements, trying to get people to watch. So you get upset about the television programming. You start to miss your favorite foods. How often can you eat schnitzel before it gets kind of old? In Germany, they used to just eat pretty much German food. So you didn't have really much of a choice. You have to be really careful about eating their sausages, because sometimes their sausage is really, they have what they call blood sausage, where it is actually just the blood of the pig in a sausage wrapper, and they put spices in it, and that's it, it's blood sausage. A lot of people don't want to eat pig blood, just eat pig blood. It's solidified, of course. They put gelatin in it so that it solidifies, but it's still the idea, and it has kind of a, I don't know if you've ever been punched in the mouth, but if you know what blood tastes like, it really kind of tastes like that, except for all these spices that are in there. So it tastes bloody, is what it tastes like.
We have our own too.
You eat that blood sausage?
Yeah, we make blood sausage out of sheep and goat.
Okay.
Yeah, then people put like vegetables in there sometimes.
Sure.
I don't eat it.
I know, just the idea of eating blood sausage. I don't eat kidneys and liver either.
Yeah, same here. It's
Yeah.
like, I'd rather eat the lean meat, but then overall, not really much of a mud either.
Yeah.
And fried bread either. 'Cause,
Oh, you don't like fried bread either?
no, not really.
Okay. I'm kind of addicted to it, so I stay away from it. Okay, so you don't like the television shows, you miss McDonald's or whatever, and all of a sudden you become homesick. Really kind of interesting. I was over in Germany 79 through 82. They just started, and there were only Cokes over there. They didn't have any other soft drinks. They had Fanta, orange, and they had Coca-Cola, and that was just about it. Then they had all these German colas, which were kind of interesting. Didn't taste like Coca-Cola, didn't taste like Pepsi, didn't taste like RC. It was just a really weird taste, a really odd thing. Hey, Mike. Anyway, so and that's when I first got over there. Then they started moving McDonald's, and they started opening McDonald's all over Germany. But we were living in Western Germany. We were living in the western part of Western Germany, and the closest one was like 55 miles away. So one weekend, for a weekend trip, we went to the McDonald's in Karlsruhe. As interesting as that is. But anyway, so you get homesick. If you ask the Germans to make you a hamburger, they'll fry you up a hamburger, but they'll put it on a hard bun. It's not a soft bun. They do have onions. I don't know why that's a problem. Their pickles taste different too. They do have mustard, but their mustard is hot mustard, and it's not really yellow mustard, it's more brown mustard. They have ketchup, but it's curry ketchup.
Isn't that kind of like Grey Poupon type of stuff?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So it's a totally different taste, and it's got a kick to it. I'll tell you what, it's hot. It's really hot mustard. It's Grey Poupon with all kinds of ugly spices in it. Culture shock is the feeling of being anxious, helpless, irritable, and in general homesick that one experiences after moving to a new culture. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of military people, they never really experience the environment that they're living in. So if they go to Afghanistan, you really don't want to go onto the economy and eat their food because you never know how sanitary it is. But it's so expensive to live in Japan or Germany or Korea that a lot of GIs just never leave the base. They just stay on the post, or they stay on the base because they don't have the money to experience the environment. As weird as that is. The symptoms of culture shock includes missing their close friends and family, of course, missing the little things about being back home, like conversations with bus drivers, eating your favorite snack, of course. If you want snack food in Japan, of course, you can't read Japanese. Unless you can read Japanese, you don't really know what's in that package. Well, a lot of times the packages that look like candy turn out to be gelatinized fish, as ugly as that is. We were able to buy squid in a plastic wrapper, in a shrink wrap wrapper, fairly thick, so we sent it to my brother-in-law. That's for a snack. Instead of eating jerky, you're going to eat some kind of strange fish. I had a friend who was from Afghanistan, and she made me dinner one time with her husband and with her kids. Of course, it's not like we're having a date or anything. Anyway, I ate there, and they had goat's head, was what they ate on a big bed of curried rice. Because I was the honored guest, I got to eat the goat's eyeball, which was a bit of well, you don't really like mutton that much, so
yeah.
You can imagine how unsavory a goat's eyeball was. It was cooked, but it was...
I tried it when I was a kid.
Oh, is that right?
I tried that, and the tongue, and the brains.
Ah,
I prefer the brains over the eyeball.
okay, well, I didn't have a shot. I didn't eat very much meat that night. I ate a lot of rice, but I didn't eat very much meat. A sojourner in culture shock may wallow in the crisis stage for several months and then start to adjust and begin to enjoy their experiences more. And we saw this all the time over in Germany. A normal tour in Germany was 3 years. So you'd watch people, and they'd be okay for the first 5 or 6 months. And then at the 6-month mark, they just got depressed. Everybody got depressed. At that stage, they wanted to make more telephone calls back home. Of course, this is back in the 70s, and you couldn't make telephone calls from Germany to the United States very easily. You had to sign up for a telephone, and then you had to, they only gave you 15 minutes on the phone. So communicating with people is mostly by letter, and of course letters, you want to talk to somebody and you send them a letter and you complain about this or that or the other. By the time you get the answer back, of course everything has changed completely. So letters just don't work that well. We could call on the telephone, but we could only call once a month as far as that worked out. Their language abilities will improve, hopefully they improve, enabling them to function better in their daily lives. So after about 6 months to a year and a half, things get better. Eventually, sojourners became better able to make enduring friendships with the locals, and they adapt to things in the new culture, such as TV programming and the food. So that these no longer felt strange. Where was I? That they had such god-awful spices. Oh, it was my friend from Afghanistan. They had started thinking more and more like the locals around them, so now their mindset has changed. This stage, labeled the adjustment phase, tends to extend over a number of years. People become more and more proficient at functioning in their new culture. They start dressing like the people in their culture, and now is the time for the nudity. Not this one, of course. We don't really care about this man and his shorts. But he is painted like everybody else around him. He has adjusted. There is nudity in the next photograph, so that's a warning. Can you tell which one is the non-African?
The second one to the left.
Yeah,
The red face one.
she's all painted up good, isn't she?
Yeah.
She also has some kind of covering over
Yeah, she
her
does. I
breasts.
think it's a sports bra.
Yeah, or something. And the other three women don't, of course. The next picture is really kind of fascinating. This is a lady from China. And as you can see, she's taken off her shirt just like this other lady has taken off her shirt. So she doesn't have a shirt on. It's really kind of an interesting picture because there's two really pissed off people in that picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. And luckily, two of the pissed off people don't have guns. There's AK-47s behind her. This is in Somalia. As you can see, this guy's pretty pissed off. And this lady's pretty pissed off.
Yeah, they're probably looking at her like, why are you throwing a peace sign up?
Exactly. Why are you doing this? I didn't notice this until I was looking at this before class. She's got her pants pulled way down on her hips. That's a little bizarre. But then again, of course, I guess that fits with her belly button's here, her belly button's right here.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just seems kind of weird. And the other difference is, of course, she's the African lady is so dark that you can't really. There's not very much difference between her the color of her nipples and the color of her skin. But of course, the Chinese lady, it's very, very much different. And I'm thinking that's why she's looking at her so funny. Yeah. Well, anyway.
I'm thinking it's the hand gesture that she's throwing.
Oh, you mean the Chinese lady?
Yeah.
This where she's holding on, trying to hold
Yeah,
on. This is a
something.
headrest for. This is what they sleep on. They sleep on these headrests.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're probably like wondering.
She's over there got that green. Well, everybody's got green on, I guess. A little weird. Sojourners may go through the same adjustment stages when they return home. Initially, people are elated to see their families and friends again and to be able to eat their favorite foods. It is not uncommon for people to soon experience reverse culture shock and find themselves puzzling over why they did not quite feel at home anymore and why they feel somewhat alienated from those around them. They don't feel like they are a good fit anymore. And of course, this is what happens to soldiers when they come home. Soldiers who, no matter where they have been, of course, they come back to the States. All of a sudden, they can get all the McDonald's that they want. They can go to Burger King, they can go to Wendy's. Whereas overseas, they had a hard time even finding a burger, especially in select portions of the world. Of course, the job that they had overseas, maybe it was combat, maybe it wasn't even combat, but it was a lot more intense. Wherever you are, it's a lot more intense overseas than it is in the States. It's a lot more relaxed in the United States. So they go through this reverse culture shock thing. The other thing is that the verbiage that they use overseas tends to be a little bit raw, a little bit raunchy, so they have a hard time readjusting the way that they talk. And of course, you see this in different movies where they talk about soldiers coming home and the fact that he can't. His mother got embarrassed because he dropped an F-bomb at the dinner table or whatever. Kind of stuff happens all the time, as weird as that is. Anyway, so we have reverse culture shock. Now, not only that, but of course on top of that, they may have PTSD, and now they're going to have a hard time trying to adjust to life back in the real world. They may go to extremes where they start using drugs and alcohol. They may try not to work for an extended length of time. They may grow their hair very, very long so that they feel like they fit in better. And of course, nothing seems to work because they have experienced something that nobody else understands. Japan is a country that is relatively ethnically homogeneous. 98% of all the people living in Japan are native Japanese. They are Japanese people, and they all look alike, and they all kind of act alike. Regardless of how well people learn the customs or master the language, they will always stand out as different from the other 98% who are ethnically Japanese. Unless you look Japanese, they're going to know who you are. And wherever you go, whether it's in Tokyo or whether it's in Kyoto or Yokohama or Misawa, where I was living, if you're not Japanese, then they will look at you and they will watch you because you not only do you look different, but you're also not trustworthy. Japanese people are it's a collectivist country, and if you're not a Japanese, then you're gaijin. You're the person that sneaks in the window at night. As ugly as that is, doesn't really matter what race you are. You can be Chinese, you can be Korean, you can be American, you can be African. It doesn't really matter. They look at everybody who's not Japanese as alien.
So that's the name for him, gaijin?
Gaijin, yeah.
Oh, okay. I've heard that saying on TV.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's
Like,
kind of fits. It's
I
kind
was
of.
thinking that that was like their name for a white man. The majority of the people they call gaijin were always white.
Doesn't matter who.
Oh, okay.
Doesn't matter whether you're white or black or Hispanic. It doesn't really matter. You're still a gaijin.
The outsider?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Kind of like you guys in Bilagana. Now I know you think that means white, but it just means somebody that's not from here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God, there's Nakai Sujini, Nakai Spa, and there's other tribes. We have different names for it.
What about black people? What are black people?
Well, the first origination was Nakai Sujini. Sujini means like black person, the blackish one.
Oh, okay.
But then there's also the short term for Jini, the black person.
Jean.
Jini.
Genie.
Jini.
Genie.
Like the Jin is the black. Then if you can say Jini.
So what are Spanish people?
There's two different kinds. There's the Mexican, there's the Spanish.
Nakai. Nakai.
Nakai is the regular Mexican.
Right, somebody from Mexico.
That's a Nakai spa. They call that to the brownish person.
Right.
Then there's Nakai Chile. Spanish, they say that their hair was kind of curly.
Curly-headed
Yeah,
people.
curly hair people. So.
Because Spanish people are actually just as pale as I am.
Yeah, there's, I guess.
They were white.
That's when I think the name changes, it changed throughout the years. They're more descriptive on it because they found out that some of them were from Spain and some of them were actually Mexican.
But the Mexicans were mixed with the indigenous people from Mexico.
Yeah.
That's why they were brown.
Yeah, the Chapa means brown, the brown ones. So Macaixtila were the other ones. So probably what they knew back then.
Well, I'll remain a Billigana, I guess. Xiao Ying in 1995. Japanese are totally different. I mean, it's very difficult to go to any place in the world where 98% of the people are the same. It's almost impossible to do that. But of course, Japanese is one of those countries. Xiao Ying in 1995 tracked the acculturation experiences of a few hundred migrants to Japan, but didn't find the pattern that Lisgard had seen in 1955. Remember, Lisgard, what he saw was a honeymoon phase for about 6 months, and then they went into an adjustment phase from 6 to 18 months, and then everything got better. But in Japan, that's not the way it worked. Instead of a U-shaped curve where things start out great, get worse, and then recover, the researchers discovered that a rather pessimistic L-shaped curve where things stay bad occurred in Japan. So it was okay in the beginning because everything was different. And for about 6 months you're okay, and then all of a sudden things just turn bad, and they stay bad. And they stay bad for an extended length of time. Xiao Ying in 1995 discovered that people who had been in Japan for 5 years were just as negative toward Japan as those who had been there for just over a year. They all seemed in the depths of the crisis stage. The problem that I had in Japan was I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't walk any place. As long as I was on the base, I could go any place I wanted. I could run a circuit, but if I was out on the economy, I couldn't go anywhere. Everything is owned. Everything is, and you're not supposed to go you're not supposed to go anywhere. It's the same way in Germany. Everybody owns something. Every piece of land is owned, and if you walk on their land, then you're trespassing. And they were really serious about people trespassing. So you really couldn't go anywhere. You had to stay on the sidewalk. And if you stepped off the sidewalk, you better step into the road, because if you step in the other direction, somebody's going to come and yell at you. That's the way it was both in Germany and Japan. The author speculates that the adjustment phase starts somewhere after 5, but before the 10-year point. So it takes between 5 and 10 years to get used to Japan. Now this is really kind of interesting because the author of your book went to Japan to teach English. And that's where he met his wife. Now, once he met his wife, he adjusted to the Japanese culture fairly easily because she was always telling him when he was doing something wrong. But before, of course, where people just looked at him and treated him badly when he did something wrong, he had a much more difficult time. So once he got married, everything was much, much better for him.
So it takes more than 5 years to get used to Japan.
Yeah, well, the language, they've got 3 different languages over there. They've got 3 different alphabets. They've got the Chinese alphabet, which is katakana, and then they have kanji, and then they have kani.
So kind of
Kana, katakana, and kanji are the 3 alphabets.
So when they go through culture shock or anything changes and stuff like that, this still affects them later on?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're always going to be a gaijin. I mean, if you can watch different movies of people that have lived in Japan for an extended length of time, they still feel alien, even if they've been there for 15 or 25 years. Even if you marry somebody that's Japanese. It's just kind of like being here, if you think about it, because if you marry somebody who's a non-Navajo, how is that individual treated? Well, they're still treated as an outsider. It's not like all of a sudden.
Okay.
Okay, so you understand what I'm talking about.
Okay.
But in Japan, of course, 98% of the population are Japanese. And they're not used to seeing people that aren't from Japan. None of the some of the television is American television, but usually the television is all Japanese. It's all of their culture. It's all their language. They're not trying to learn a different language. Sometimes there will be printed English on signs or whatever, but it's usually a joke. It's usually negative. They had a drink over there called Pocari Sweat. Who in the world would name a drink after armpit juice? That doesn't make any sense. But that's the name of it. And the idea is that when you sweat, you need to drink. It's an electrolyte drink. It's like Gatorade.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's sweet. Oh my God, it just about knocks you on your keister. It's so sweet. But it's really popular over there, Pocari Sweat. It's written in English. Well, it's a joke. It's kind of it's a negative statement about sweat, because the Japanese don't sweat. Okay. Cultural distance is the difference between cultures and their overall ways of life. We can hypothesize that the more cultural distance someone needs to travel, the more difficulty the person will have acculturating. And of course, that's what's happened. That's what happens in Japan. We can't speak the language, and their culture is so much very different from ours. It's the same problem that we're having in Iraq and Afghanistan. Very, very different culture from the American culture. Despite the fact that the Brits have been there for a couple hundred years, or were there until 1945 anyway. They were in that area of the world, and theoretically, of course, the natives in that area adopted the English language. They adopted English ways of thinking and doing things. But the reality is, of course, they have always been hostile to Western thought. There are various measures that can be used to determine acculturation across cultures. One indirect measure is language performance. Several studies show that the best predictors of acculturative success is language ability. So if you can learn the language, then potentially it will be a lot less difficult for you to acculturate. My daughter had a great time in Germany. She picked up the language really, really fast. She picked up the German. I didn't pick up hardly any. I can read German, but I can't speak German. But she could not only read it, but she could speak it as well. Knowles, Pond, and Clement in 1996 speculated that the greater the confidence in the mastery of the host country's language, the greater the identity with the culture. And of course, if you can speak the language, you do feel an affinity for the culture. Of course, this is difficult in places like in Muslim countries, where women are rejected. It's really kind of interesting if you find an interpreter in Iraq or Syria or Afghanistan. Usually it's a female, because females are second or third class citizens in that area, and for a foreign female to come in and try to learn the language, it's a lot easier because they are appreciative of it. But males, of course, aren't supposed to do that. So a lot of the interpreters are female in Muslim countries. When foreign students seek entry into the United States universities, they are required to take the TOEFL. The TOEFL stands for Test of English as a Foreign Language. Research shows that individuals who came from countries that are similar to English, Dutch and German, perform better than those who grew up speaking other European languages that are a little more distant, like the Romance languages, French and German. And of course, this lady is Dutch and this lady's German. You can tell it says Germany on her shirt, and this one, she's all dressed in orange. And of course, the Dutch soccer uniforms are always orange, as weird as that is. So Dutch and German, English is a Germanic language, so Dutch and German are very similar to English. I was watching 60 Minutes last night, and they had a program about the Dutch plane that was shot down over the Ukraine. And they had all these people that were Dutch on the show, and they all spoke English almost better than most Americans, as weird as that is. But of course, it's Dutch, and Dutch is very similar to English. So it's very easy for them to switch from one to the other. So the closer the language to your own language, the easier it is for you to learn a different language. The farther away it is, the more difficult it is to learn, to be able to pass the TOEFL and to learn the English language. According to the Educational Testing Service, which administers the TOEFL, speakers of Indo-European languages tend to perform better on the TOEFL than those who speak languages from highly distant language groups such as Kazakh in Kazakhstan and Japanese. Japanese is very, very difficult to learn. It's very, very difficult for the Japanese to learn English because some of the sounds that we make in English, they don't even make in Japanese. So it's really tough for them. I had a student at Ashford who was from Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, they speak Bangla, which is the Bay of Bengal is right there, and that's where the language got its name, Bangla. It's very similar to Hindi, which is the major language in India is Hindi and English. So he learned English from his youth. And he could read it very well. The problem was he couldn't speak it with an American accent. So he had a difficult time being understood because he had an Indian accent. So if you've ever called IT to get them to help you, a lot of times you've got somebody from India. And even though they're using the right words, they don't use the right inflections. It doesn't quite sound right. And it's difficult to understand what they're saying. Well, my student was exactly the same way. He's in Dayton, Ohio right now at graduate school at the at Wright State University. Last time I talked to him, he had found a girlfriend, which he'd been looking for. Fascinating. He had a difficult time finding an American girlfriend. When he first got to Ashford, he said he didn't want an American girlfriend because they were too wild. After being in the United States for a while and not meeting any women from India or Bangladesh, he decided that he would like to date American women, but he couldn't, or he didn't. He had a difficult time getting past. There was some roadblock that was in his way, and he just couldn't make any headway with any American women. It was really kind of bizarre. Anyway, he's got a new girlfriend. She's from Canada, as interesting as that is. I haven't talked to him since he told me about his Canadian girlfriend, but this is really kind of interesting. Couldn't find an American girl that wanted to date him. Nice guy, really good looking fella, but there was some roadblock. There was something in the way. Most of the people at Ashford were from Chicago, and maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. I'm really confused as to what was going on. Maybe after I talked to him again, the last time I talked to him, I had a really tough semester last semester. And this semester is equally as tough, so I don't have time to call him on the phone, but next time I talk to him, I'll see if we can figure out what the hell was going on. The American women just would not have anything to do with it. And it may have been that he was too nice. I don't know. And he doesn't drink and smoke, of course. He's Muslim, so he doesn't drink and smoke. Cultural distance encapsulates more than just language. Many other skills must be mastered when people move to a new culture. Ward and Kennedy in 1995 compared the adjustment of Malaysian university students in New Zealand, a culture that is quite different from their own, despite not so distant proximity. This is Malaysia right here, this is the Malaysian peninsula, and this is New Zealand. As you can see, it's not that far away. And a group of Malaysian students in Singapore. Now, Singapore is right at the end of the Malaysian peninsula. And actually the culture in Singapore is very Malaysian. Of course, the culture in New Zealand is very English because it was settled by Englishmen. The students completed a measure of cultural adjustment that assessed their daily problems in navigating through the new culture. After spending almost 3 years in the two countries, the Malaysian students who were studying in Singapore reported having fewer difficulties than those who were studying in New Zealand because it was such a cultural difference. And of course, Singapore's right here at the end of the Malaysian peninsula. There's Australia, New Zealand's right over here. But they had a much more difficult time in New Zealand despite the fact they weren't that far away from their own home. Sojourners from more distant cultures suffer from more distress, require more medical consultations, and have more social difficulties in general than those who traverse less cultural distances. And this is what we were talking about in Singapore. And we're going to talk about 3 indigenous tribes. These are 3 indigenous groups from Canada. Some indigenous Canadian tribes, such as the Tsimshian of the Northwest Pacific Coast region, engaged in subsistence practices, primarily fishing for salmon and shellfish, that allowed them to accumulate large quantities of food and establish permanent, highly stratified settlements long before they had any contact with the Europeans. These are the guys that made the totem poles, the Tsimshian, along the coast of Canada, the west coast of Canada. The Eastern Cree, who look kind of like Tsimshian, starts with a T.
Doesn't that kind of sound like an Asian word?
Tsimshian? They're not. They don't look Asian. Certainly don't look any more Asian than anybody else, I guess. The Eastern Cree live just below the tree line in northern Quebec. They engage in subsistence practices, hunting in the winter and fishing in the summer, which does not allow them to accumulate much food. So some of the bands are migratory and have a low sociocultural stratification since they have to move around so much. These are Eastern Cree. The Carrier, or the Atlasashima, they are an Athabascan speaking group, live on the Rocky Mountain Plateau of northern British Columbia, also engage in hunting and fishing like the Eastern Cree. But because they have the possibility of accumulating large numbers of salmon at the headwaters of some rivers, and because their culture was influenced geographically close to the Tsimshian, the Carrier represent a culture with a moderate degree of food accumulation and social stratification. Are you going up to Canada to see the Carrier? Are they the Carrier or the Dene?
Assiniboine.
Assiniboine. Oh, the Assiniboine. Assiniboine are Siouan-speaking people. And in Canada, they don't call them Assiniboine, they call them, wait a minute.
The Plains Cree?
No, don't ever call them Crees. Crees are Chippewa. They speak the same language as the Chippewa.
But they call themselves Assiniboine Cree and Plains Cree.
No. Assiniboine Cree. No. I'm trying to think of it. Wait a minute. There's Carry the Kettle and Bloods. Bloods are Blackfeet and Carry the Kettle are Grovine. I can't think of it. Doggone it.
They live right there in the North Battleford.
Yeah, they're just north of,
Montana.
yeah, just north of where I used to live. Can't remember what they called them. Oh, Stonies.
Stony, yeah.
Stonies.
Stony.
Sure.
Stony Cree.
Well, see, that's what Assiniboine means. Assiniboine means hot rocks. They used to boil the fat out of the bones of the buffalo by digging a hole and filling it up with water, and then they throw hot rocks in there, and all the fat would come up to the surface. So that's why they call them Assiniboine. Yeah, Stony, that's what they call them. Yeah. Wow.
Are they, part of this?
No, no, these guys are, no, they're not Athabascan. They're Siouan-speaking people. But they were the ones involved in the Real uprising, where so many people got killed.
Oh, yeah.
The Mounties just massacred anybody going across the border. I don't know why they didn't want to let them come back in the United States. A lot of them did escape, and they're the ones that were at Fort Belknap and Fort Peck.
Oh, okay, is that why they're connected to the Sioux people?
Kinda, yeah. But they also were connected to the Gros Ventre. Gros Ventre are Algonquian-speaking people, but they let them come in. The Assiniboine are shorter and darker, and the Gros Ventre are taller and lighter complexioned. They're Algonquian-speaking people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if you look at the, no, I don't. Oh. If you look at the patch for the Fort Belknap, it's got two Indians looking at each other. One of them is darker than the other. The darker one is the Assiniboine, and the lighter color. The Gros Ventre were called the White Clay people. They used to paint their faces white. So did the Blackfeet. They'd paint their faces white, and then they would put on their war paint. But one thing they did was use white paint, White Clay people.
Oh, okay.
That's not important as any of that is.
Well, it is.
Well, you're going up there. Yeah, well, it is
up there,
because you're
yeah.
going up there. Okay.
Interesting.
Well, I'll show you some Cree people in just a second. So I was at Fort Belknap, right next door to Fort Belknap. Part of their old reservation, they chopped off and they gave it to the Chippewa Cree, which are the Western Cree. These guys are the Eastern Cree. The Crees speak Chippewa, a Chippewa language. And they referred to them as the Chippewa Cree because what happened was the Eastern Cree were okay because they were way up north, and the Mounties didn't bother those guys. But the Chippewa Cree, they kept trying to kick them into the United States. They kept going between one fort and the other. The fort at Lethbridge and the fort at Havre, Fort Assiniboine. So they kept kicking them back and forth. And eventually they ended up in the United States. The last place they went was the United States. So we had all these Chippewa-speaking people that were in the Turtle Mountain, Rocky Boy, all these different Chippewa bands.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to think of what the other guys were called. Little Shell. Little Shell. So Little Shell are landless. It's a landless tribe. It's not recognized by the United States government because they don't have any land. They were kind of SOL. Oh, it's not that funny at all. And so when Rocky Boy was the Cree chief, when he finally negotiated with the federal government after they were going to close Fort Assiniboine, he was supposed to include the Little Shell, and he didn't because he was afraid there wouldn't be enough food for his people. So he left the Little Shell out in the cold, and they still don't have any land, as weird as it is. It's an ugly story. One group of natives undercutting another group of natives, it just didn't make any sense. So what are we doing here? The Carrier are an Athabascan-speaking people. There's two major groups. Actually, most of the natives in Alaska are Athabascan. They speak an Athabascan language. These are the ones that aren't what we used to refer to as Eskimo, the Aleut, the Yupik, all those guys.
Not the name.
They speak an Athabascan language. Okay, but the Dene are down in Canada, over by Banff. and Lethbridge, you know, right in there. But because they had the possibility of accumulating large numbers of salmon at the headwaters of some rivers, they were more similar to the Tsimshian, and of course geographically they were right next door. So they were somewhere in between the Eastern Cree and the Tsimshian. Barry and Annis in 1974 speculated that the more stratified the culture, the more similar they were to the European culture, the easier it would be to acculturate to the European dominance. The Tsimshian acculturated the easiest, the Eastern Cree had the most stress in acculturating, and the Carrier were somewhere in between. And of course, these guys are Cree. The Cree dancers from Canada. And there you go, that guy's a Cree as well. Cultural fit is, see, one of the things that happened when the pressure started because of all the European incursion along the east coast of North America, it forced all the tribes westward. And when that happened, the Cree had this huge tribe, and they were able to conquer all kinds of interesting people. Other very warring tribes. That and the fact that they were armed by the French traders, so they were able to push everybody west. Cultural fit is the degree to which an individual's personality is more similar to the dominant cultural values in the host culture. It would seem that the greater the cultural fit of a person with the host culture, the more easily he or she should acculturate to it. We can tell that this is a Cree because they have, it's yellow, they have yellow paint. Yellow and black, as you can see, as curious as that is. So we know that they're Cree. Cree are real big on colors, lots and lots of really cool colors. People who score high on the extroversion are more likely to move to other countries, particularly to urban areas when compared with those who are less extroverted. Now, one of the things that we never talk about, but one of the things that is really quite important is that how introverted and how extroverted are people. The more extroverted somebody is, the more successful they're going to be in select circumstances. Usually those are urban areas where a pushier personality is going to get something. If they came here, of course, and they had a pushy personality, well, potentially they wouldn't be very successful. Now, if you look at the people that have taught psychology here, I'm introverted, Sarah was introverted, but Sue was extroverted. And Sue had a lot of trouble when she was here. Mostly it was her knocking heads with the administration because they wouldn't listen to what she had to say. But of course, Sarah and I have had a lot less trouble than Sue had. Some researchers have proposed that because extroversion should facilitate communication everywhere, extroverts should always fare better in the acculturation experience compared with introverts. But this isn't true. It's okay if they move to Hollywood, if they move to an urban area. My son wanted to be an actor, so he moved to Hollywood. Well, he's an introvert. He's from Nebraska, so he's an introvert. Well, he did okay as a bartender, but he wasn't pushy enough to get to be able to become an actor, because what you need to do is sell yourself, and that's something he couldn't do. The study in New Zealand found that Malaysians high on the extroversion scale showed more signs of well-being than those who scored low. So as long as you're moving to an extroverted country, a country where extroversion is rewarded, then you're okay. But most of the collectivist countries, most of the countries like China and Japan are not extroverted countries. They are more introverted countries. And because of that, individuals who are extroverted, who move to an introverted place have more problems because they are seen as so much different from everybody else. Extroversion does not always facilitate acculturation. It appears that an extroverted personality makes a better cultural fit in New Zealand than it does in Singapore. And extroverts will fare better in the acculturation experience only when they fit in well with the culture. And of course, if it is a culture that does not reward people standing out, then an extrovert, of course, will be rejected. I was talking to Marius. Marius was talking about bringing one of his colleagues. He used to teach at NPC, Northern Pioneer College or something. It's over there in Show.
Northland Pioneer College?
Northland Pioneer College, yeah. He used to teach over there, and he had this guy from the East Coast. He was from Boston, the Boston area. And he was supposed to bring him onto the reservation and show him around. Well, they brought him onto this reservation, and this guy, of course, wanted to go to a ceremony, and he wanted to go to a sweat, and he went up into the mountains, and he started crying because it was so beautiful. And Marius, he just spent an hour and a half complaining about this guy because it was so embarrassing for him to bring him to the Navajo reservation and have him reacting in such a dramatic way.
Yeah.
He said it just didn't fit, and it really bothered him just a ton. And of course, he's telling me this story. Well, I'm a Billigana too. You may have noticed I'm a Billigana too. Highly extroverted immigrants fare better in terms of their well-being when they immigrate to countries with overall more pronounced levels of extroversion. People with more independent self-concepts have been found to suffer less distress in acculturating to the United States than people with more interdependent self-concepts, and people who have patterns of emotions that are more similar to those from the host culture report experiencing greater relational well-being. I don't seem to have any problems here. I mean, he was telling me this story. So evidently my personality fits better with the Navajo personality than this crazy priest from Boston. It just didn't work. And he was embarrassed. He introduced him to his father, and his father said, "What the hell's wrong with this guy?"
That's exactly how Navajos are, honestly.
Yeah.
Somebody like overdoing with Navajo-ness, we're
Right.
just like, okay, not too much,
What's wrong with this guy?
We're not that Navajo.
Just back off a little bit. One acculturation strategy is that people need to participate in the larger society of their host culture. Are the people motivated to acquire an identity consistent with that of the host culture? And we've talked about this before. When I was in the service, I had to decide whether I wanted to act like the people that I was stationed around, or whether I wanted to act like I have always acted, like somebody from a farm boy from Indiana. I had to decide that because there were a lot of people that wherever they went, they started acting like the people around them, which was kind of ugly in some instances because I was stationed in Mississippi, and white people in Mississippi are kind of racist. They're pretty racist people. So if you go to Mississippi and you start acting like the white people there, then you're going to have to act in a racist manner because that's the way they are. So this was tough.
You know, there's like one thing I've always noticed about people in the eastern part of the United States.
Yeah.
I always wonder why their attitudes like that. And I would say, I think it's the heat, the humidity.
Nah. Because you see it farther up north too. You see it in Virginia, you see it in West Virginia. One of the things is that when immigrants come to the United States, they always stop first on the East Coast. So they have this idea that I'm different and I need to, I either need to assimilate or I need to force people into my way of thinking. So a lot of immigrants who are from places where they hate, The English hate the Irish don't like the English, the Germans don't like anybody except themselves, you know, that kind of thing. When you have that kind of a mindset, and it's just being pancaked in, it's just comes in waves, and you've got all these people that dislike other individuals, it just kind of sticks with you, and it stuck with the immigrants coming into the United States. So they all had hates, they all had dislikes. You know, I didn't realize this until I was in Omaha, and I ran into the Czechs and the Slovaks. They hate each other, they despise each other. They would have street fights between Slovaks and Czechs because, you know, they're both Catholic. I don't know what they weren't fighting over religion. They were fighting over the fact that Slovaks who live in the eastern part of Czechoslovakia, or what was Czechoslovakia, those guys were mostly farmers. They were mostly agrarian. They weren't as highly educated as the people that lived near Prague. They were the Czechs. So they were the more urbanized individuals. They were more educated. They were more industrial. And because of that, they hated each other. And they used to kill each other all the time. It doesn't have anything to do with heat.
Oh, okay.
Okay, hate doesn't have anything to do with heat. It has to do with the culture that you grow up in. And some cultures, like the German culture teaches you that everybody is inferior to you. And they've been teaching, and the odd thing is the Germans have only been a country since 1870. Before that, they were all chopped up into a bunch of little bitty principalities. And they weren't Germany at all. They were German speaking, but they weren't Germany at all. They were just a bunch of tribes in essence. But still they got this idea that they were superior to everybody else. As weird as that is, because everybody and their cousin came in and conquered little chunks of them from time to time. So you had the Poles came in, the Swedes came in, the Austrians came in. I mean, everybody came in. Napoleon walked all the way through Germany and captured every little principality. I don't know, it's really kind of bizarre. We're talking world history all of a sudden for some reason. So one of the things that you have to do is you have to decide what your culture is going to be. Are you going to try to assimilate into their culture, or are you going to try to maintain your birth culture? You know, that's one of the things that you have to decide. And this is something that people in the military have to decide all the time. We talked about Seagal and Chuck Norris. When they went to Japan, all of a sudden they adopted the Japanese way of thinking. They adopted their way of fighting. You know, they learned jujitsu and taekwondo and whatnot. But in order to do that, they had to adopt the Japanese culture instead of the American culture. I'm not sure where Seagal is from. Anyway, they're both in the Air Force. And because they were in the Air Force, they were allowed to stay in Japan for 3 years. A tour in the Air Force is a 3-year tour. In the Marines, it's a year, or it's a combat tour for 15 months. But in the Air Force, you get to stay someplace for 3 years. So these guys were able to adopt that culture and then become, these fabulous martial arts, yeah. Do people have positive attitudes toward their heritage culture, and are they actively seeking ways to preserve the traditions of their heritage culture? And that's another question that you have to ask yourself. Another strategy of acculturation involves attempts to fully participate in the host culture while at the same time striving to maintain the traditions of one's heritage culture. And this is known as integration strategy. This young lady, of course, she has decided that she's going to adopt the Japanese culture, so she's wearing her kimono. She's got her face painted like the Japanese do. She's mirroring the Japanese geisha, which is really kind of interesting because if you go to Japan, most of their kimonos are fairly dull looking. I mean, they've got all these really odd colors in them, a lot of greens and whatnot. When the Americans go over there and they buy a kimono, they don't want to buy a kimono that looks like this. They want to buy a kimono that looks like this. So we buy these wild things. And we call them kimonos, but the reality is kimonos are really fairly dull looking. The colors don't ever go together. I mean,
Kind of like the style of women's dresses from back in the 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah, back in the day.
yeah, really
Just plain and just.
bland, really
Yeah.
bland colors. And that's really the way the Japanese are. This is a Japanese geisha, and as you can see, she's got her face painted, and she's, it's very traditional. Well, here she's got, they put these little tiny lips on themselves because they're supposed to have small mouth. Well, here's this big mouth American with this little bitty tiny Betty Boop lips on. And this is known as integration strategy, where you maintain your own culture, but of course at the same time, you try to participate in the host culture. And we used to see this all the time in Japan, especially in Japan. When we first got there, there was a Buddhist parade. They were having a parade through Misawa, and about a third of the people in the parade were Americans. And of course, everybody had on traditional garb, but the traditional garb for the Japanese, especially in hot weather, was just that strange jockstrap looking thing, the thing that I can't, sumo wrestlers wear them.
Oh, yeah.
And that's all they were. And that's all they had on. So the Americans are kind of standing around with all this stuff on. And of course, Japanese don't have any hair. They don't have any hair on their chests. They don't really have hairy arms or hairy legs. And here, these Americans, they look like bears out there with just this little jockstrap thing on. It was kind of interesting. And they were playing the Japanese war drums and whatnot. Of course, no American was playing the war drums. That would be incorrect. They were pulling them along, as weird as that is. And strangely enough, because they pulled their kimonos off, they pulled their kimonos down, the women did the same thing. Well, of course, in the United States, a woman would never bare her chest just to be part of a parade. But the Japanese women were doing that. The Japanese women had their kimonos pulled down. There weren't any American women that were doing it. Only U.S. servicemen, but no females. Really kind of weird. A little bit different. People are trying to participate. And as far as the Japanese were concerned, this is no big deal. A woman showing her chest is no big deal as far as they're concerned. They have public bathing in Japan. It's integrated bathing. So the males and the females will bathe together. And
Yeah, I've seen that on movies.
yeah, it's just the way it works. I never went in, but it was a little bit different. My wife never did it, but just the way it was. The breast to the Japanese is not an erotic fixture on their bodies. It's just not. It's just the way it works. Just like the African women with their bared breasts. Didn't mean anything to them. Of course, when we saw the Chinese woman with her shirt off, that was a little bit of a shock. And it was a shock to the Africans. They had never seen somebody so pale, I guess. The strategy that involves little or no effort to participate in the host culture or to maintain the traditions of the heritage culture is known as a marginalization strategy. And this was a really serious problem with the indigenous peoples in the United States around the turn of the 20th century. There were boarding schools, there were individuals that were being taken away and they were being educated back east. When they came back to the reservations, of course, where they were supposed to re-educate individuals as to how to be good Americans, they had been marginalized because not only did they reject their own culture, but they also rejected the Western culture at the same time. So a lot of times we had this marginalization. People using this strategy have negative views toward both their heritage and their host cultures. This strategy may be something pursued more by the people who have grown up in multiple cultures across their childhood. And of course, what culture are they going to adhere to? That is one of the questions that you have to ask. That's what the play, if you've ever seen West Side Story, or if you understand the story of West Side Story, that's really what's going on in that play. Are they supposed to act white? Are they supposed to act Puerto Rican? They're supposed to hate each other, and here two people fall in love. Hatfields and McCoys, same situation. We have two individuals that are supposed to hate each other, and instead of hating each other, they fall in love, and they have to reject both cultures in order to survive. Some individuals who have grown up in multiple cultures are sometimes termed as third culture kids, and thus will identify themselves as global citizens. And of course we see this from time to time, especially in Europe, but also with American businessmen. A lot of times they will find out that despite the fact that they were born in Connecticut and they were raised in New York City, they have traveled all over the world, and they will adhere to different aspects of different cultures that aren't really American. And because of that, they feel that they are global citizens, that they're not really American citizens, but they're global citizens. Now this may be the problem that we're having with Donald Trump. Donald Trump, of course, is he a global citizen? He has properties all over the world. He has golf courses in Scotland. He's got, he wants to build the Trump Tower in Moscow. How many places around the world is he financially embedded in? And is he really an American? Well, he certainly doesn't act like a 70-plus-year-old man who lived through the Cold War, because he seems to be embracing Vladimir Putin and the Russians, as weird as that is. So the question we have to ask ourselves, is he really a global citizen? Some researchers do not accept marginalization as legitimate acculturation strategy, but as a form of neuroticism. You need to know who you are, and this is one of the things that people that have studied cultures, people that have studied different areas, one of the things that they do, one of the things that we realize is that you need to understand who you are, and if you don't have a culture to base yourself on, to anchor yourself, a lot of times these individuals will suffer from a lot of depression, a lot of neuroticism, anxiety because they don't know who they are. We see this on the reservation with somebody who's trying to adhere to more than one culture at the same time. Somebody that is trying to be white, but they're also trying to be Indian at the same time. Can you do that? This whole apple thing, red apple thing, not green apple, that wouldn't make any sense. So they're Indian on the outside, but they're white on the inside. As weird as all that seems.
Or apple would be referred to natives trying to be white.
Yeah, red on the outside, white on the inside.
Yeah.
Okay. Oreo cookie, black on the outside, white on the inside. Oreo. Reverse Oreo, white on the outside, black on the inside. Okay. This assimilation strategy involves an attempt to fit in and fully participate in the host culture while making little or no effort to maintain the traditions of one's heritage culture. This is the melting pot that we try to force people into through our educational system when we had so many immigrants coming into the United States at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. This is what we were trying to do to people. This was the education we were trying to give them. And it worked. It mostly worked with the children of the immigrants coming into the United States. So if there were two adults and they came to the United States for a better life, they had a difficult time assimilating. But the kids, of course, had to go to school, and the school was teaching them that this is what it means to be an American, and this is the way that you need to be. It involves having positive attitudes toward the heritage culture. It reflects a desire to leave behind the ancestral past so as to fit in with the host culture. And that's what West Side Story is all about. West Side Story is the females are trying to, the males are fighting in the streets because they're trying to establish their Puerto Ricanness, and the women are trying to get along in society. And so they're telling them to reject Puerto Rico and to be Americans, as weird as that may seem. We'll stop right here. We'll pick this up with separation, whatever.